Newt, it's great to talk to you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm actually pretty optimistic that this thing is going to work out this fall, partly because of what you said. You have the best economy in most of our memories. I think you have to go back to when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969 to have the same kind of economic growth pattern. You have, I think in the Senate, and I share much of your frustration about specific bills, but I look at what Mitch McConnell's doing on judges.
Oh, he's great on that.
And it is absolutely historic. And in terms of the constitutional balance, we will, by the end of this year, I think, and McConnell's just announced he's keeping the Senate in for most of October, which keeps the endangered Democrats really trapped in Washington instead of going home to campaign. But there's a pretty good chance he's going to get all of the president's nominees for judges through before the election. Now, that will literally reshape about 1/4 of all the federal judges
great.
in the first 2 years. It's amazing.
So Mitch is going to keep them all in session. That came out yesterday. He's going to keep them all in session through October. And, of course, right. Republicans only have really a handful of Senate seats that are close. But the Democrats, I think, have like 30 that are really, that are being contested. So that's actually, is that smart strategy? You like that strategy?
Well, I like the strategy a lot because every single one of these votes, for example, the Kavanaugh vote, I think, is putting enormous pressure on the Trump state Democrats. If you're in West Virginia where Trump, I think, won by 26 percentage points, do you really vote no on Kavanaugh? But if you vote yes, you really infuriate your liberal allies. And so you see a lot of these Democrats now with huge problems in the Senate because they can't deal with Trump's values. They can't deal with people back home. And that's part of why there won't be any kind of a blue wave this fall, because in the Senate, we're almost certainly going to pick up seats. And if we run the right campaign, and I just did a paper that's available at Gingrich Productions and at Amazon on the 2018 election, and I outline how Republicans can win a landslide this fall.
Oh, great.
This fall, election night this fall could be as big a shock for the liberals as election night 2016. And you'll remember how many of your liberal friends had bought the champagne, were ready to party at 8 o'clock that night, and by 10 o'clock that night were in despair. I think you could have the same kind of turnaround, which is why I don't take any of these polls very seriously right now, because I think they reflect media bias rather than where the voters will be at the end of the campaign.
Yeah, and again, the chaos and the threats of violence and the Maxine Waters, the Trump's a Nazi signs, all of this leading to an atmosphere that, and I've been in this town for basically 30 years. Time to get out. But I've been in this town for like 30 years in Washington. I've never seen anything like this. I really haven't. And Trump's busted up the old order, and they don't like it.
That's right. I've said over and over again that Trump is the most effective anti-liberal president in my lifetime. He's not an institutional conservative. He's not a philosophical guy. But the impact of what he's doing is disrupting the left more than any president in my lifetime. It's an amazing thing to watch. And I think the left knows this. And, they look at the difference with Kavanaugh replacing Kennedy, as you know, because you're an attorney and I'm not. But the court actually is going to move substantially towards a more conservative Supreme Court in a way which, if you're a left-winger, just terrifies you. And he's doing this with regulations. He's doing the tax policy. The tax cuts are working. And so the left is right at the edge of seeing their entire lifetime of effort to make this a left-wing country just go down the drain. And that's why you get the bitterness in the Obama speech, because Obama sees all of the left-wing radical things he believes in being put under pressure by Trump.
Yeah, and it's I think bitterness is a good word to use. The bitter, deceptive, toxic.
Well, look, I think this happened to me when I became Speaker. We had not had a Republican Speaker in 40 years. In fact, we had nobody in the Republican conference who had served in a Republican majority except Bill Emerson, who was a page back in 1950, literally a page in 1954. So we all arrived, and the first week our staff had to keep telling the Democratic chairman that they had to sit in the ranking member seat because they would walk in and automatically start to sit in the chairman's seat because they'd done it for their entire career. And it never occurred to them that they could be in the minority. And their reaction wasn't, boy, we must have made a mistake, we must be out of touch. Their reaction was, Gingrich and the Republicans cheated. Well, that's the same thing you're getting with Trump. I mean, instead of realizing they had a terrible candidate on a terrible platform with a terrible record, it had to be something that Donald Trump did. That's really been the hallmark of the left for the last 2 years. And I think that Trump, if you look at his speech, for example, the other day in Montana, Trump is really catching the rhythm of a big choice election, which is what my paper's about. And he said at one point, you know, the Democrats want to abolish ICE. We want to abolish MS-13. You decide which team you want to be on. And I think that kind, we're for jobs, they're for food stamps. I think that kind of big choice election could end up crushing the Democratic Party this fall.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And the deceptions that are advanced and highlighted by the American media culture, especially by certain cable outlets other than Fox and in Amazon Post, what used to be known as the Washington Post, and of course the New York Times. This seeks to sow this sense of chaos in America that Trump, and this is David Gregory saying this on MSNBC, that Trump's basically arguing the economy, but that doesn't matter. Let's listen to.
I think one of the big issues for President Trump is that he's seen as a chaos agent, even among people who support him or among people whose support might be a little softer for him because of his personal attributes, his leadership style, the chaos around him, the drama, the coarseness of his leadership style. All of those things, I think, can tend to undermine him among independent voters.
He went on to say the economy, so arguing the economy isn't going to help him.
Look, I sent an email to my good friend Alan Guelzo, who is a very distinguished scholar of Lincoln and the Civil War at Gettysburg College. And he sent me a whole set of quotes, which I'm putting into an op-ed that we'll publish in the near future. And we're going to try to get the New York Times to publish it, which is my answer to Anonymous and to Bob Woodward. And if you go back and look at what people said about Lincoln personally, the La Crosse newspaper says, if he gets reelected, we hope somebody will kill him. Literally, this is in the newspaper. The New York Times describes him as utterly, totally incompetent, incapable of running the White House, too weak a person. The New York Daily News says, his wife is stronger than he is. It's pathetic to have him as president. And people forget Lincoln was constantly being criticized, exactly like Trump, because, he was a lawyer who never had a big staff, came from Illinois, had to learn to be president, and it took him a while to do it. But he had enormous willpower. He was very, very smart. He changed history. He kept the Union when it could have easily collapsed. And the only reason I raise this example is I keep telling people, if what we're seeing right this minute, massive deregulation, biggest in history, dramatic number of new judges, the most ever in a 2-year period in history, the roaring economy with records being set every month, if this is what Trump is like when he's dysfunctional, what would he be like if he was functional?
Exactly. I said if he has dementia in the mind of a 7th grader or 5th grader, then bring on the 7th and 5th graders, because, gosh, yeah. I'll take that any day over the so-called smart people who got us into all these messes.
Well, these are like people who say, yeah, maybe it'd be like having a quarterback who won 45 straight games, but he didn't exactly know which spoon to use at a formal dinner.
Man, that's ridiculous. Hey, Newt, George W. Bush is going out and campaigning for a few candidates, apparently not for Ted Cruz in Texas, but for this guy, Congressman Hurd, who's running for re-election, and Rick Scott in Florida. It's curious, because if you're so anti-Trump as he is, and he didn't vote for Trump, none of the Bushes voted for Trump, they've kind of attacked Trump as an isolationist and nativist and all these things, then how do you go out and campaign for people whose the party leader is Trump? How does that work?
Well, I think he's being too clever, frankly. But again, it goes back to style. I mean, the Bushes represent an establishment. Ted Cruz is a populist. I think and I think in some ways they see him as being like Trump. There are two wings of the Texas Republican Party, and the establishment wing has been steadily losing ground. And I think this is, they resent it. It's interesting in terms of Florida. I mean, first of all, I love Governor Scott. He's done a great job. I think he's going to win that Senate seat. So I'm glad that George W. Bush is willing to go campaign for him. But, the party has been very, very good to the Bushes. And at some level, it seems to me, that they ought to at least consider being good to the party.
Yeah, it would be nice if every once in a while we had heard from the Bushes when, the Obamacare was happening, or the Benghazi, or the attacks on, I guess you don't want to talk about Benghazi, but they have no problem speaking out against Trump. But boy, we didn't get much help during the Obama years. Not even veiled references to Obama.
No, and I think again, in some ways, there is a presidential establishment, and they see themselves in some ways as closer to the Clintons and the Obamas because they're all in the club.
Absolutely.
And they just and again, I mean, but at one level, I don't blame them. Look, Trump was very tough about Bush's policies. He was very direct. He represents a fundamental.
Yeah, true. He doesn't have to like him.
Those policies. And so what you're watching is real history. In 1936, Al Smith, who was had been governor of New York, was the Democratic nominee for president in 28. Leaves the Democratic Party because Franklin Roosevelt's making it too liberal, and he just can't stand it anymore. And people tend to forget that there were never FDR people, just like there are never Trump people. When you get a genuine change agent like Trump, there are going to be some people whose noses are out of joint, and they're going to be unhappy.
Newt Gingrich here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Newt, it's always great to have you on. We're linking up. We're linking up your website so you can read the paper Newt wrote on how to win in the midterms and defending America. Just fantastic. Always just a pleasure to talk to Newt Gingrich.